knight takes g5. If you've done enough puzzles, you'll know some weird mating patterns, but I played the very stylish king f2. Hey guys, welcome to today's video, and today is the final recap for the tournament that I played 3 days ago on Monday. And I had white again. I got 2 whites in a row, which is nice since there's only 3 rounds, so 1 black, 2 whites is quite a nice draw. So I played d4. I'm going to play the Jobava London, surprise, surprise. So this just starts out like a very, very normal Jobava London, and then my opponent plays a6. It's like the one thing that I just hate facing, maybe besides like e6 and then c5. That's another difficult line for me. But I just played the normal move. I know at least like what you're kind of supposed to do here. After bishop f5, I'm just like, okay, there's like one move here that's so typical. It's bishop d3. Now, opponent just takes, and I take with the c pawn, which is very, very typical, and you want to use that pawn later on to play e4, and also this stops the knight from coming to e4 early on. So my opponent plays e6, and then I play knight out to f3, just very, very normal. The computer sees queen b3, but I think knight to f3 is just more normal, and knight f3 actually essentially won me the game. It didn't directly win me the game, but it gave me a giant advantage that just led me to just keep my foot on the gas pedal basically the entire game and like crush my opponent. I mean, to be fair, like I was only up a pawn for most of the game, and you'll see why, but that just helped me crush my opponent for the rest of the game. So the entire game starts off with knight to h5, and the idea is very simple here. He wants to take my dark squared bishop, and essentially what you want to do here is not give up your bishop for free, but oftentimes you're still going to end up giving up your bishop for the knight. So what you usually want to do here is play bishop e5 or bishop g5 and induce the f-pawn to step forward and create a weakness around the king. I decided to go bishop to g5 because that makes him have to spend one more committal move in order to capture my dark squared bishop. So that's what happens. f6, kick back my bishop. But I played bishop back to h4, preserving my bishop for one more move. And my opponent blunders with g5. And you may be like, why is that a blunder? It's hitting the bishop like you said, so you're just going to move it back and you're going to trade the bishop for the knight. Right. I wasn't totally telling you everything. And if you're very tactical, you've done a lot of puzzles, you might have seen this pattern before, but you have knight takes g5, which I found is very typical here, and the main thing you have to watch for is that the queen is hitting the knight and the knight has no defender. So after, for example, after here you just take and you're just absolutely winning, because I mean, if you take here now, then you have bishop takes g5, and yeah, his queen isn't very happy, and his king is just going to be unsafe for a very long time. His pawn structure sucks, and it's just a very easy win. So my opponent just played essentially the best of the worst and played knight back to g7, and I didn't see this move. I kind of kept it simple, but the computer find knight takes e6, knight takes e6, check here, and there's an attraction tactic here with the king. Wait, what? That doesn't even work. Queen e5, king f7, oh, queen takes h8. I didn't see that. That's a, let's see, this variation goes all the way to move 16, so I'd have to calculate, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 moves into the future. And that's counting every single move, not like the move counter, because it goes from move 11 to 16. So I just keep it simple. I didn't feel a need to go too deep here, and I just went back to f3. I won a pawn. His king side sucks. So yeah, and I think this is a pretty obvious mistake for black here. If you've ever had like chess coaching or chess fundamentals, they always tell you not to move the same piece more than once in the opening. And as you'll notice, the knight's the only piece my opponent has moved, besides the light squared bishop, but that got traded off like immediately. But This knight is the only piece that I just moved besides the bishop that got traded off. So let's go knight f6, knight h5, knight g7, and knight, let's see, knight f5. Look how many times it's moved. It's moved 4 times. Like, none of these other pieces have moved at all. Only pawns and this knight. You have no development. I have 3 pieces out. 3 pieces out. And I'm about to castle. Your king side is in shambles. You've moved 1 piece, and you have, like, no pieces developed at all, and you're not castling anytime soon. I mean, in order to castle, you have to move your queen, this knight, and you have to castle over here. So that's at least 3 moves. I castle in 1 move, and I still have attacking chances with this f6 pawn, and also I'm just going to push e4 and explode the center before you even get castled. So my position is completely winning here for pretty obvious reasons. So I castle. It took me 1 move. My knight is defending my bishop. I didn't feel a need to preserve it any longer. I can't even really preserve it any longer without damaging my kingside pawn structure. So I decided, okay, it's fine if I just keep it protected with the knight. I don't really need to do anything here. My opponent plays rook g8, which I think the computer's being a bit harsh here. I mean, it makes sense. You're putting pressure on the g file. It's looking directly at my king through the pawn. So I think it's not that bad of a move. Although I'm in the moment, I was like, that doesn't really do anything. I don't really have to react to that move. So I played e4, just a very, very principled move, opening up the center while my opponent's king is still in the center. So that just gives me a massive attack. And this came all from principle. Like, if your opponent's king is in the center, you're castled. Usually it's a good idea to open up the center. Of course, I checked to make sure there's no attack here. I mean, his queen has to make 2 moves, and I can just defend with 1 move, so I was never really worried. And if knight takes, then I have g3 to also protect the g file. So I was never really worried about an attack along the g file. So after I checked for that, I'm like, okay, my opponent's king is in the center. Let's open up the center and let's start attacking. So after I played e4, my opponent took the bishop. Obviously I took it back, or else I'd be down a piece. And as you may notice, this also opens up my queen to this pretty venomous check on the h file, and that'll come to bite my opponent later on. So after d takes, I decided to keep it simple and just took back with the pawn. This is for endgames if that ever happens. I didn't really want to calculate too deep here, since I can just give a check on the next turn, basically no matter what, unless my opponent goes here, but then I was going to go f4. So yeah, I decided to keep it simple here. His opponent, I mean, his king is never going to castle, and I honestly think queen e7 isn't that good, even though the computer thinks it's the best, because of the very simple queen to h5. Computer doesn't agree with it that much, but it's still a very significant advantage for me of +3. So after queen to f7, I just take. And look at the king's positioning. It's behind like a very weak pawn structure. His pieces aren't developed here, and his king's just basically never going to be safe here. So I continue along principles. His opponent's still basically in the center, so I open up the center even more. And my opponent here kind of fell apart, to be honest. My opponent went bishop d7. I have no idea what this does. Does he want to go like f5? I don't really know. So I just keep it really simple here, and I take on e6 with check. After king takes e6, I block the f pawn and make his bishop look really stupid by playing knight to f5. This puts pressure on the bishop, and it blocks the f pawn, as I said before. So his bishop just looked really stupid on the e7 square. It had better squares to go to earlier on, but obviously my opponent didn't play any of those and wanted to go for some trick. But I didn't allow him to do it, so now he is in an even worse position. So after knight c6, I play the best move, and it's kind of obvious why, in my opinion. I am putting significant pressure on the bishop now, so now the knight and king both cannot leave the bishop alone, or else they will just lose it. And my opponent here plays, which I think is the best move, rook to c8. And the reason why is because this knight was about to fork the king and the rook on c7, so he very obviously defends it. And I set a nice trap here with rook to c1. It's also just a generally good move. The trap here, by the way, let's say my opponent does nothing with like h6. You know what, I'll make a more sensible move, h5. I have rook takes c6, and after pawn takes, I have knight d takes e7, and this forks the rook, and it ends up winning a full piece in the end. So at the end of this line, I will be up a knight. Instead of that, my opponent played bishop to d6, which is the best move. I mean, I honestly didn't see this move. This is probably one of the only good defensive measures for my opponent. The other move is bishop to f8, which I also didn't see, but it doesn't really matter. My position is just so good here that I don't really have to worry about these defensive moves because I can just make very normal improving moves. Also, I just took that because the structured bishop, it was kind of looking at my king, and I just didn't really want to worry about it. So I took it with my knight and damaged his pawn structure again. If he took with the king, I would have taken a pawn, so that's why I took with the pawn. So now I play rook f2 d1, setting up just some attacks along the d file. And I don't know why it calls it inaccuracy, because this move actually ends up winning me the game later on. So after rook to g4, which is a pretty bad move, I play f3, and this is another move that won me the game in actually a couple moves. So my opponent plays rook back to g7, so essentially just wasted a move in my opinion. I don't really understand why this was even a threat, because of f3. f3 is just absolutely shutting down everything there. So I give a check here, and it wasn't actually for a particular reason, rather than I wanted to force my opponent's king back and maybe put my rook on to d5. But my opponent decided to be quite bold here and played king to e5, and I thought I had some amazing calculation here, because if you've done enough puzzles, you know some weird mating patterns, and my brain was just firing at me. I'm just like, there's a checkmate here, and it requires you to sacrifice your knight. It works, and I saw like two different mating setups here. There's a mate with g3 and also rook to f5. So in this position, I played rook d5. The computer calls it inaccurate, but I do not care. This move 100% made it easier to win the game for me. It says play g3 first, which makes more sense. You're setting up a mate in one. But I wanted to play it in more my style way. I wanted to sacrifice the knight. It wasn't actually necessary, but I just didn't see g3 first, and I thought this was more forcing. So the only legal move here for black is to take my knight, and if you know the mating pattern here, you'll know that this square is the one that king would escape. So you either have to stop that. This move doesn't work because now you're not touching the rook on the c file, because that's the one thing that's like keeping your position together. So your opponent has knight to e5 here, cutting off the rook from the f5 square. But I played the very stylish king f2, and this is just an absolutely savage move. Basically, if you do nothing, I have two mates. I have g3, rook takes g3, and h takes g3. This is the mate I would have played. It's with a pawn. It's disrespectful. It's funny. But there's also rook f5 mate. So once I saw that both these checkmates existed, I'm like, okay, I have to play this sacrifice. This sacrifice works 100%. But there's one detail that you kind of have to see, is that once your rook gets cut off with knight to e5, the g5 square is now free, so there is no g3. You can't play g3. It's still the top move though, since there's a check and it forces the king back. And you actually are winning a piece after after you force it back by force. But I just take the rook because it's a free rook. I'm going to take a free rook. There's no need to complicate things with g3. Of course, g3 is still slightly better, but whatever. So my opponent plays rook g6. I don't particularly know why. I don't really know what it does. I guess it defends the f6 square. Maybe he wants to play rook to h6. But I just play h5 here. And the reason I played h5 is now if rook h6, I have, again, g3 mate. And the reason I played h5 is to take away the g5 square away from the king. So now if you notice, the king is actually in stalemate right now. It cannot move. So my opponent plays f5. Again, an excellent move. And the reason why this is excellent is it's going to open up an escape square for my opponent's king. For example, after f takes, now the f square, the f5 square is free for the king to go to. And my opponent, I play rook to f8, again threatening mate 1, pinning the pawn to the king so it can't capture. It's pretty obvious the best move. It was a very obvious move. And my opponent, again, finds his nice tactical resource. The best move, knight to g4. And this move kind of annoyed me because I'm like, oh, I have to keep playing on. I'm up a rook, but it's still just a little bit annoying. So after takes, I took with the d5 rook instead because I just wanted to line up this way. I thought it just made more sense. I don't particularly know how to explain it now, but yeah, I just connected the rooks this way. It says rook to d2, but I think connecting the rooks is a lot more natural. So after rook takes g4, I supported my h pawn with g3. It wants rook h5, but I like keeping my rooks connected, and I feel like that helps me later on. So I attack the pawns with my rook and also ask for a rook trade. Obviously my opponent declines since I'm up a full rook, and trading rooks would be just certain death here. But now I give a check and I take the h pawn. And the reason I took the h pawn first is exactly as follows, because after rook c8, now I take the b pawn. And the reason I did it in this order is now revealed, because now after rook to c2 check, the rook defends the b pawn. So now I can just slide my king up and not worry about anything. I'm up a million pawns, a rook. I'm certainly winning this game. I'm now in like no danger at all. So after d5, I give another check and play a rook back to e2 to just put a rook behind the pawn later on, and again ask for a rook trade since that'll be a certain win. So my opponent goes back to c8, and I simply play the savage move h5. And in this position, my opponent simply resigned, since I'm going to be able to put a rook behind my pawn in 2 different ways. I'm up a rook, the king is cut off. There's so many different reasons that I'm going to win this. So my opponent just resigned, and in turn I finished the tournament with 3 out of 3 points, perfect score, and I won the prize. So that does it for this tournament. But quick little accuracy check. I had some inaccuracy, so I didn't get a very high accuracy like I would have hoped, but I still played fairly accurate. So my accuracy was 84.6, and my opponent had an accuracy of 77.7, which is good accuracies. I mean, it's subjectively good accuracy, especially for humans, but I would have preferred to have done better. I had an advantage the entire game, so I think the accuracy is again being a little bit harsh. Stockfish is definitely harsh with accuracies and such. But the estimated ratings, I also think was quite harsh, but I had an estimated rating of 1950, which is alright. And my opponent had an estimated rating of 1600, which is also alright. So yeah, good tournament by me. Obviously I could have played that last game a little bit better, more accurately, but I think I got the job done. But yeah, thanks for watching today's video. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe, and I'll see you tomorrow.